Chimes by Muriel. Tonight is the anniversary of one of my most puzzling murders. It was the autumn of 1954, when life was sleepier than it is now. Saturday, 2nd October to be exact. For a detective, I haven't a particularly good memory as a rule, but you will see presently why I remember this particular date. It was nearly an unsolved murder. Old Matthews was a farmer of the village of Mellow in the West Country. He was found dead on the morning of 3rd of October, in an outhouse of his own farm, lying at the foot of the ladder leading to the hayloft. He was 82. At the inquest, the local doctor gave evidence that Matthews' death was due to a fractured skull. It was assumed he'd been up in the hayloft during the night and had fallen down the ladder. The verdict was death by misadventure. You will wonder what old Matthews was doing in the hayloft during the night. He slept in the hayloft. It is true he owned the farm, and there was a large farmhouse where his wife lived. You must understand that Matthews was rather peculiar. So was his wife. They didn't get on together, and he preferred to sleep in the outhouse. Situations like that are not unusual in the deep country. The inquest was soon over, and Matthews was buried on the 6th of October. A fortnight after the funeral, the police received an anonymous letter accusing Harold Matthews, the son, of having murdered his father. It was not generally known at the time, but in fact Harold was not old Matthews' legitimate son. The police frequently receive anonymous letters, and so they took no great notice of this. They tried to trace the author, whom they suspected to be some village woman, but they were unsuccessful. Before long, however, rumours were going about the village to the effect that Harold had murdered his father. The police questioned Harold. He was unhelpful, but that wasn't his fault, for he was rather simple. Within 3 months the rumours had increased, and a reporter from a national newspaper was said to have visited the area. The police had to act. They disinterred Matthew's body. The Home Office pathologist found that the fracture on his skull had been caused by a blow. It was now certain that Matthews had been murdered during the night of the 2nd to the 3rd of October. Poor Harold tried to explain to the police that he could not have killed his father, since old Matthews was not his father. That's how the police came to know about his illegitimacy. But in any case, they didn't waste time trying to get sense out of Harold, for the man had a perfect alibi. During the night of the murder, he had been watching the others playing cards in the kitchen, and then had gone to bed in a room which he shared with one of the farmhands. It was at this point in the investigations that we from London were called in. First, we were presented with a number of established facts. On the afternoon of the 2nd of October, Matthews had gone to a farm 2 miles from Mellow to help with a difficult carving. He left this place just after 9 that night and was seen to cross some fields slowly because of his age. This would bring him to the main road at about 10:20. The doctor was passing in his car and stopped apparently to give Matthews a lift. Matthews entered the car, where he sat talking to the doctor. A courting couple who passed them at 10:30 said they seemed to be arguing rather violently. No one observed the car drive off. You will wonder how the witnesses remembered these encounters 3 months after the event. Well, mainly because it was the night old Matthews was killed. People said, when they heard the news of Matthews' death, "Why, I saw him that very night," and so on. It's surprising the things people remember, and what they forget, especially in this case, as you'll see. Everyone at the farmhouse was equally clear about what had happened that night, with the exception of Harold, who wasn't clear about much. They had been playing cards in the kitchen, some farm labourers who lived at the house, and Mrs. Matthews, with Harold looking on. At midnight, they heard a car drive up the farm lane and stop outside the outhouse. They assumed that old Matthews had got a lift home. They heard him, as they supposed, enter the outhouse, the door of which had a noisy hinge. A few seconds later, the car drove off. This was at midnight. They all swore they heard the church clock strike 12 when the car arrived. By our reckoning, it was not old Matthews whom they heard entering the outhouse, but the murderer dumping the body. A murderer with a car. Now Matthews had been seen arguing with the doctor at 10:30, only a few minutes' drive from the farm, yet these noises were not heard till 12. We questioned the doctor, of course. His name was Fell. He lived in another village, Otling, 3 miles from Mellow along the main road. His story was that he had sat chatting to Matthews, a patient of his, for over half an hour in the car. They had had a little argument about politics. He had then driven Matthews to his farm, arriving there at 11 o'clock. After that, he had proceeded home, where he arrived at 11:10. There he found an urgent message to visit a patient and set off immediately. He attended to his patient, a childbirth case, and was home again just as the church clock struck midnight. Dr. Fell's manner was extremely helpful. He actually wrote out a statement for us, giving all his movements that night and citing his witnesses. We checked up on everything and could find no flaw in his alibi. There was no doubt he had visited his patient at 11:20, for the child was registered as having been born at 10 minutes to 12. His housekeeper's niece, who had just returned home from a dance, as well as his wife, gave evidence of his return home as the clock struck midnight. He couldn't have been both at Mellow and at Otling as the church clock struck midnight, and I was assured that the church clock always kept perfect time. And you will say, were the farm people lying? Did they really hear those noises at the outhouse at midnight? Do you know, it was a strange thing. We are all of us experienced in detecting lies, but we couldn't break down one of those witnesses, either at Otling or at Mellow, in the slightest detail. We had no evidence against Dr. Fell. It was quite a puzzle. 3 months after the event, you know, there isn't much evidence to go by, fingerprints and so on. But we suspected Dr. Fell. Our investigations had brought another important fact to light. Old Matthews had been receiving monthly payments from Dr. Fell for 30-odd years. Of course, we thought of blackmail. We questioned Mrs. Matthews about this. She denied knowledge of the money, but eventually told us that Dr. Fell was Harold's real father. It looked very much to us that the monthly payments were made to keep old Matthews quiet. A country doctor can't afford to lose his reputation. And we found that a few months before the murder, these payments had increased. This increase coincided exactly with Dr. Fell's marriage to a much younger woman. If our theory was correct, Matthews had seized the opportunity of the marriage to increase his demands, for in those days, perhaps even now, a doctor would not wish his bride to know of an illegitimate son in the neighborhood. Here, then, was a clear motive for murder. But Dr. Fell had his alibi. We could not prove it. I questioned him again. His eyes fixed themselves on me. I was almost hypnotized. I must say I felt very uneasy in his presence. But of course, in our profession, we are trained to discount most of our personal feelings when dealing with a suspect. Still, the old rhyme went round my head as I drove away from his house. I do not like thee, Dr. Fell. The reason why I cannot tell. But this one thing I know full well. I do not like thee, Dr. Fell. Shortly after this, a member of the local police made a discovery which earned him promotion. He was looking through the statement which Dr. Fell had written out for us when he noticed a peculiarity in the writing, which coincided with that of the anonymous letter they had received accusing Harold of the crime. The letter had been written in a disguised hand, but still the experts confirmed the suspicions of that clever policeman. Now at least we had something concrete to tax Dr. Fell with. and a concrete charge is always a help in a murder case. He was, of course, upset at our discovery. Eventually he admitted writing it, said he had genuinely suspected Harold but could not bring himself to say so at the inquest. We suggested to him that the letter was written as a defense against blackmail on the part of Harold. The doctor denied it. However, I went off to interview Harold, hoping to discover what he knew about Dr. Fell. With simple people, it is best to be direct. I said, "Harold, why did you try to get money out of Dr. Fell?" He said, "Eh?" I said, "You think he killed the old man, don't you?" He said, "That's right, sir, I do." But like ourselves, poor Harold had no evidence to produce against the doctor. There were probabilities, but simply no answer to the fact that he had been seen at Ottling at the very time the car had been heard at Mellow. I can't tell you how disappointed I was after that interview with Harold. There was no further point in our men hanging on at Mellow. We were to return to London next morning, our criminal in sight, but not brought to justice. I was so disappointed that I said, half to myself and half to Harold, if only we could shake his alibi for that particular midnight. Harold didn't seem to take this in. I went my way. But in a moment, Harold was running after me. "You'll never get him, sir," he said. I said, "No, that's just what I mean." He said, "You see, sir, there was 2 midnights like that night. That's why you'll never get him. You can't get a man between 2 midnights." 2 midnights, I said. "Right you are, sir," Harold said. "It was the end of summertime, wasn't it? And they put the clocks back. Old Fell done it between the 2 midnights, and you'll never get him." "Harold," I said, "you're a genius." "You'll never get him," he said. I went to see the verger, who recalled, yes, come to think of it, the church clock wasn't put back till a couple of days after the official date. The town clerk, on the other hand, was proud to declare that he had arranged for the town hall's clock to be put back on the afternoon of the previous day, the 1st of October. "You don't catch us napping," said the clerk. "Won't we?" I said. It didn't take us long to put our point of view over to Dr. Fell. He confessed to the murder. It had taken place in a field. He had hit old Matthews over the head with a wooden leg. He had the wooden leg in his car, for earlier that week he'd been getting it mended for an old pensioner in the village. In some ways, Dr. Fell was quite a kindly man. Well, having killed old Matthews, he dumped his body in the outhouse at 11 o'clock by winter time, 12 by British summer time, and the church clock. These were the days of capital punishment, but his son commuted to life imprisonment. The law does like blackmail.